Hi all and welcome to the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams and this is From Russia with Love 3. That opening song, The Best Ones Lie. Oh boy, have we been lied to. And this third piece that adds to my series From Russia with Love 1 and 2, that showed much of our past was a lie. His story distorted beyond all reason to fit a political, social, financial and religious programming on the surface, but on a deeper level this was an off-world program of such epic proportions that it's barely believable on a human level in its scope, length or the depth of it, and that has left many on this planet mentally comatose. I've tried with my shows not to get people to believe or just follow what I put out, but get people to think on the subjects. Thinking on these things has been bypassed by so many of the people around the world due to clever programming and our base level naivety. Many people struggle with believing anything to do with off-world here, as it's considered outside of the norm. The norm, or normal, is another directive program of what is considered correct or not, and is ultimately a control system. Many people struggle with the facts, the levels these people will go to engineer a program that at its base level was control, top level was a full-on harvesting program of us all. Any attempts to lift humanity out of its slave comatose state and enrich or enlighten humanity was met with swift retribution. That echoes through the very core of your vessel, spirit and soul. Many people struggle with the fact of the levels of acts and behaviours perpetrated could be possible, but that's because they apply their own baseline models to all others. We're not all the same. And this failing to recognise the depth of depravity in others has come at a great cost to many humans here, in particular the children. Look at the recent list of crimes many of us have just found out. Most became comfortable with the fact that child paedophilia was done by dirty old men in trench coats, only to find it goes right through society, using the very institutions supposedly designed to protect or serve our communities, like the police, judges, lawyers, child protection services, social services, governments, hospitals, doctors, nurses, mental health, secret services and agencies, charities and the church. Very few of you a decade ago believed that level of connectivity and collusion was possible. Many still don't. And this is how this criminality continues to this day. And it was only because of the few who dared not only to bring it up, but to tie it all together, that this dis-ease within humanity began to be addressed. Of course, those people who did expose it were given every label under the sun: nutty, not normal, conspiracy theorists, troublemakers, misfits, and the list goes on. Quote, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic and or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension the truth is the greatest enemy of the state." Mr. Goebbels. Goebbels, like Hitler, went to great lengths to cover up their Jewish ancestry. The majority of the SS were of the Jewish line descent, and why Germany, who are of Aryan descent, remember, was set up by the same goons who destroyed and took over Russia in the previous war. To get the Germans to destroy Russia again in World War II, but the real programme was to destroy the German and several other neighbouring countries who were of Aryan descent, to eliminate each other. Don't believe it? That's fine. And listen closely to this show with an open mind. It lays it all out for you. Allow yourself your own thinking process, not what others have given to you all of your lives. We've all been fed a diet of bullshittery from the day we were born or arrived here. You can stay stuck in the program narrative that is their belief system, or develop your own. That is the key here. They presented their story and we present our story. With a true open mind, which one makes sense? This whole series is not designed to promote all things white. What is white anyway? I myself am more olive-skinned than white, if truth be told. I'm not blonde-haired or blue-eyed either, considered the ultimate in creation by the think tank programmers, fed by the same psychopaths who brought us 2 world wars and tried to initiate a 3rd one. White privilege is another program, so you can target the ones they want you to. Meanwhile, the so-called white privileged people have been decimated demographically by 2/3 in less than 100 years. That is not a conspiracy. That is a fact. This piece will also show how they've used every colour on the planet, every peoples, and used every country as a platform to run their heinous plans. They've used all religions, all of which stems from one book, designed for one group of people by their off-world gods. The things we will be covering tonight is several-fold, of how the Kali-Ma peoples, who were taught by the Anunnaki, who became the human form of control here, morphed into the cult of Amun-Ra, then into Hebrewism, the Greeks, and then Rome into Catholicism. It will show that Israel is really a cult of Egypt. Both the Draco Anunnaki and the Hebrew people are known as the chosen ones. Noah, Moses and Abraham were all their disciples, not ours. They were thrown out of the Garden of Eden and exiled to Egypt. How they created another cult there and ultimately spread throughout Europe and eventually the Americas. So the timeline of the Garden of Eden in India to Egypt, which then created the Amun-Ra cult. Ra is associated with the lion and then the domesticated cat. The eye of Ra is a cat symbol. Ptolemy the first Sota, which is where the Greek reference came in, and took over the reins of the Kali-Ma, Amun-Ra, and brought in Alexandria, which is the name of a place in Egypt named after Alexander the Great, who was Greek, who went on conquests from Egypt to India. Was that retracing the steps of those who were chased out of India into Egypt in previous times? Until we came to Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen, except she wasn't Egyptian. She was Ptolemaic and Greek. Cleopatra, then a lover of Julius Caesar of Rome, and later became the wife of Mark Antony, who was a politician and a general in Rome, and is known as the person who started off the Roman Empire. But it was not just any Roman Empire. Oh no, it went back to the worship of the cat and Ra, and created the religion of the cat known as Catholic. We roll into Genghis Khan. Who are the Indians? Who are not Africans? European houses all built on Egypt, and how everything associated with Israel is really a cover-up of Egyptian connections and Ra. I will repeat again, I will use terms in this show that will name the modern day versions as they are labelled currently, but this is not an excuse to denigrate them all based on that label. Everything is connected or linked once you see the pattern. When you master the pattern, it applies in most of the fields, and you can then predict the future with it. Future is the past once you see the pattern. Now, the idea is not to bring the past into the now or the future, but correct the mistakes of the past so it doesn't have a future. The first part we're going to get into is genealogy. There's a narrative globally that most Jewish people originated from modern-day Israel or latter-day Palestine region and Judea. But does that theory stack up? A recent announcement was that 90 to 95% of peoples known as Jews did not originate anywhere near to that region. Now, this must have come as quite a shock to those peoples. For so long they have believed that they are an integral part of the Holy Book and subsequently the Holy Region, when they have been played all along. So let's look at where their origins are from. There is no doubt about the easternmost subfamily, which consists of the languages of Iran and the Sanskritic languages of India. Key connection. To these, the name Aryan or Indo-Aryan is commonly applied. This word, which occurs in both Old Persian and Sanskrit, has the meaning of noble. That's not a title of nobility, it's a state of being noble. And was a common enough way for peoples to designate themselves in the past. Now, the name Iran, in the ancient form Aryana, means the land of the Aryans. In the Sanskrit form Arya means man. That's why the continent was called the Arya, and was used from early times to designate the worshippers of the Brahmanic gods. Now, the term God or gods back then does not have the same meaning as it does now. It just means higher evolved beings. They're not your God. They're just higher evolved beings. In other words, they have completed several soul growth cycles, and not necessarily just the earth-based one either. Now, the concept of Brahman is posited as that which existed before the creation of the universe, which constitutes all of existence thereafter, and into which the universe will dissolve into. So it's source. Source is everything, including you. Now, Brahmanism refers to the religion, which it's not, that had expanded to a region stretching from northwest subcontinent to the Ganges Valley. That's key for those who have listened closely to parts 1 and 2, because that is the location of the first Garden of Eden in India. As a side note, India at a later date was called the Raj for British rule. But is it Raj? Bear in mind the letter J was not introduced until 1400s, possibly later. Or is it Ra, as in Amun-Ra? Now, Britain gave up control of India and the Ra, or Raj, in the very same year as Israel was created, is Ra-El. El means God. Coincidence? You choose. In 2006, a study by Bihar, based on what was at the time high-resolution analysis of the haplogroup K, mitochondrial DNA, suggested that about 40% of the current Ashkenazi population is descended matrilineally from just 4 women, or founder lineages, that were likely from a Hebrew Levantine mitochondrial DNA pool originating in the Middle East in the 1st and 2nd centuries. Additionally, it was suggested that the rest of the Ashkenazi mitochondrial DNA is originated from 150 women, and that most of those were likely of Middle Eastern origin. In reference to specifically to the haplogroup K, they suggested that although it is common also throughout Western Eurasia, which is India, they were trying to prove that it was only in that region, when the likelihood is it came from India. The observed global pattern of distribution renders very unlikely the possibility that the 4 aforementioned founder lineages entered the Ashkenazi mitochondrial DNA pool via gene flow from a European host population. Very unlikely. And a 2014 study found that Ashkenazi Jews display a frequency of the haplogroup K in their maternal DNA, suggesting an ancient Near Eastern matrilineal origin, as in India. Not European, not Middle Eastern, or Mediterranean. Look like an Egyptian, eh? Let's see where the next part takes us. So they cast out of the Garden of Eden in India to Egypt, and they left India and went to several countries, all now known as the Istan countries. Istan means browning, a clue to the skin colour from white to brown. 200 years later, they arrived in Egypt, having been thrown out of every Istan country along the way due to bad practices and the subjugation of the native peoples of those countries. Now, Egypt, within the same century, developed a new cult by these same peoples called the Amun-Ra, which is where the term Sunday comes from, and called the Sabbath by the Jewish peoples, Ra being the solar god, sun day. Now, what is the most common term of Egyptian rule? It's the word Pharaoh. Pharaoh means great house. Now remember what was written in the book of the prophets, O ye house of Israel. It was these same houses that went through Europe later and to rape, pillage, murder and sacrifice so many of us. Let's look to see if there's a common link of Egyptians' Amun-Ra cult and the modern day Israelites. The term Pharisee, a member of an ancient Jewish sect, distinguished by strict observance of the traditional and written law, and commonly held to have pretensions to superior sanctity. Sound familiar? Pharisee means separated one, as in the chosen ones. Did you know the word church also means the separated one also? The Pharisees were at various times a political party, a social movement, and a school of thought in the Holy Land during the time of the Second Temple, Judaism. Now, after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, the Pharisee beliefs became the foundational, liturgical, and ritualistic basis for rabbinic Judaism. That's where it came from. Quote, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much as a child of hell as you are." Unquote. That was Jesus instructing his followers about the religious hypocrites who are themselves children of hell. Jesus says they had taken away the key of knowledge. Sin cast your sins. Now, the God of knowledge is known as sin. Cast, spell your knowledge away. That's what that means. That was what it was warning about. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were both religious sects within Judaism. If the Sadducees couldn't find a command in the Tanakh, they dismissed it as man-made. Compared to whom, you may ask? The Sadducees rejected the idea, and this is a key thing to take note of, rejected the idea of an unseen spiritual world. The Sadducees denied the afterlife, holding that the soul perished at death. They will use that denial of knowledge to great effect over time. Socially, the Sadducees were more elitist and aristocratic than the Pharisees. Again, sound familiar? And the Sadducees tended to be wealthy and to hold more powerful positions, and the chief priests and high priests were all Sadducees, and they held the majority of the seats in the Sanhedrin. The Sadducees were friendlier with Rome and more accommodating to Roman laws. We'll find out more about that later. So the land of the Pharaoh, and Pharaoh means great house, and later we will show how the houses went out of Egypt and went into the houses of Europe, the church, and the so-called elite bloodlines. The prophet Jeremiah, in a judgment uttered 2,500 years against Israel, quote, "Among my people are found wicked men. Their houses are full of deceit. Therefore they are become great and waxen rich. They judge not the cause of the fatherless, yet they prosper, and the right of the needy do they not judge." Unquote. Semite, a member of any peoples who speak or spoke a Semitic language, including in particular the Jews and the Arabs. It's not just one peoples. Semitic people, a member of any or of various ancient and modern peoples originating in southwestern Asia, including the Akkadians, Canaanites, Phoenicians, Hebrews and Arabs. A member of any peoples descended from Shem, who was the oldest son of Noah. So Noah wasn't one of us. Now there's an ancient German word, or Germanic word, that may be a pointer. You decide. Semite. Semitisch. Semitish, which means Proto-Semitic. Semitic. In other words, the Semitic Urs. The Urs came from Russia, not Israel. So did the Semites. So the Sadducees denied the unseen spiritual world and yet worshipped Amun-Ra. And as we have pointed out in several shows, is how the system changes names. Sometimes it's just a vowel, other times not. And you will see further examples of this in the next section. They blame translations and local dialects, but there's far too many of examples of the control system using this to deflect who is who and also what is what. Like Bauer became Bayer, which is Rothschilds. Several examples. Amun, A-M-O-N, also Amon, A-M-O-N, and also Nahum, N-A-H-U-M, was a demon. Is a marquis of hell who governs the 40 infernal legions. Amun is a demon and the grand marquis of hell and the seventh spirit of the Goetia. G-O-E-T-I-A. Goetia is the practice of conjuring demons specifically related to King Solomon. Amun became Amun, became Amen. It is a calling sign and a worship of Ra. And why it's said on a Sunday. The Pharaoh men to Hotep, ruling the Upper Egypt, was seeking for reunification of the country, subjugating the Lower Egypt, and as a result a single religion was formed. And the merger of the two cultures of Amun, who is a demon spirit, and Ra, the sun god of the Egyptians. So it combines the two gods, God Ra, mentioned above, and the god Amun, who is the supreme god of the upper realm. Now, in order to unite peoples back then, priests have given new supreme deity common features of both Amun and also Ra. At the initial stage, the sun god Amun-Ra was still depicted as in the image of a big cat and was the patron of these animals. So now we have the rise of the cat and its programming, and this next piece will lay it out. Egyptian god Ra and the goddess Bastet looked at the world through cat's eyes, and people could make their prayers heard via cats. Now, according to the Book of the Dead, the eyes of Ra changed depending on the time of day. The eye of Ra can be the sun or the moon. Some will worship Ra, the sun, and some will worship the moon. In fact, all Jewish religious holidays are moon-based. All of them. Of course, cats, as we know, can also do this trick too. In bright light, their pupils constrict. becoming almost invisible slits. Now, Bastet first appears in the 3rd millennium BC, which is significant, where she is depicted as either a fierce lioness or a woman with the head of a lioness. But that changed. 2,000 years later, during the 3rd intermediate period of Egypt, which is 1070 to 712 BC, Bastet began to be depicted as a domestic cat, or the cat-headed woman. Herodotus also relates that many of the solemn festivals held in Egypt, the most important and most popular one was celebrated in Bubastis in honour of this goddess. And each year on the day of her festival, the town was said to have attracted some 700,000 visitors, both men and women, but not children, who arrived in numerous crowded ships, and the women engaged in music, song and dance on their way to the place. Great sacrifices were made, and a prodigious amounts of wine were drunk. Wine, spirit. More than was the case throughout the year. Now this accords well with Egyptian sources that prescribed that lion goddesses are to be appeased with the feasts of drunkenness. And you all know what alcohol does. Of course, alcohol brings in the demons, of which the former Egyptian leader Solomon bound many of them to that region under the covenant. And yet the same cult denies it exists. The afterlife, the demon spirits, the spiritual world. It's another common theme, is it not? But out of interest, only the Jewish-based faiths denies the existence of demon spirits or the spirit world. The killing of a cat in ancient Egypt was punishable by death or a huge fine. And the punishment was defined on the basis of the cat owner's status. The richer the owner, the more severe the punishment. In his chronicles, Diodorus Siculus describes the case of lynching a Roman who accidentally ran over a cat. Cats were mummified and buried in coffins, decorated according to the income of the owner. Bast or Bastet is the most famous cat goddess in Egypt. Prior to the domestication of these animals, she was, as I said, depicted in the image of a lioness or a woman with a lion's head. Having domesticated cats, ancient Egyptians have changed the image of Bast. The goddess became a cat, with a cat's head turning into a bloodthirsty lioness if humanity makes her angry. Nice goddess to have that. Look, I know people like cats, but is this really normal behaviour? I would suggest no. Let's look into this deeper. Like I have said, this whole thing of cats being everywhere is a deep-seated program, as you will find out. The cat goddess in Egypt, the relationship became something more than master and servant. Living along the Nile made the Egyptian storehouses particularly susceptible to rats and mice, making cats that much more essential. And this dependency soon became outright worship. Slowly, religious cults arose around cats. The cat party. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote of great festivals and magnificent temples in Bastet's honour. Her temples were often occupied by hundreds of cats, and these cats were sometimes mummified and given great tombs, all supplied with mice, rodents, milk and sources of food. The most spectacular of these was found in Bubastis, where there are remains of some 300,000 cats were found. In many households in Egypt, the cats ate the finest food and were denied nothing, with rights even to the master's plate. A cat's death was subject to public mourning, and a priest inspected the corpse to see if its death had occurred naturally or not. Their human families sometimes mourned for weeks, even shaving their eyebrows off to show their sorrow. Does that sound like normal behaviour to you? Maybe not. The Eye of Ra. By 1500 BC, cats became closely associated with Bastet, a solar deity and the protectress of the pharaoh. Known as the Eye of Ra, she originally had the body of a woman and the head of a lion, and was considered the instrument of the sun god's vengeance. Again, not a particularly nice god or goddess. But over time it came replaced by the domesticated cat. The change from a more aggressive deity, it is said, to a more tender-natured one developed naturally when people considered the domestic cat's nature. Now, soon Bastet became associated at a later date with motherhood and fertility. That's the hidden hand again. Expectant mothers prayed to her for protection, and barren women prayed for help. Sometimes, however, even centuries later, Bastet was represented holding a lion's head at her side, suggesting the ferocity that lay buried in her subconscious, similar to a domesticated cat. She was beloved all the same, and soon the most pleasant and joyful aspects of Egyptian life were placed under her protection. The sunrise, music, dance and pleasure, as well as family, fertility and birth, all fell under her domain. Criminal cats. Perhaps this association with sexuality that led to some serious problems for the cats in many European countries during the Middle Ages. Although cats are not mentioned in the Bible, superstitions sprung up around them. Their nocturnal habits frightened some people, and they became associated with Satan. Cats were often accused of killing children by sucking out of their breath, and they were sometimes tried and convicted before a judge, and even sentenced to death. Even owning a cat was considered dangerous, leading to accusations of witchcraft. The fall from grace. The reign of the cat declined, however, and soon their place in society changed. By about 300 BC, there is evidence that many cats were raised with the intention of being sacrificed. Deep scans of mummified cats discovered that many cats had broken necks before mummification, suggesting the animal was intentionally killed. At this time, the entire Egyptian kingdom was in decline. In other words, the cult was leaving. But the cats had already found their way to the rest of the world at this point. Traders often took the cats onto ships to protect their food from vermin. When the boats docked in foreign cities, the cats escaped and began a new life. Why was the Egyptian kingdom and the cats of Ra into decline at 300 BC? Because it morphed into Rome, and eventually the cat-holics Catholics. Holics means indicating a person having an abnormal desire for or a dependence on. Catholic. In this case, cats and the cult of Ra, which is why churches have their mass on ritual sacrifice day of eating the flesh and the blood on Sunday for Ra, a role that was played by Marduk at one point in time. The earliest version of domesticated cats was only found in Egypt and nowhere else across the world at that time, which suggests to me they were created by the off-world group as a means to lower humanity. All hail and bow to the cat, which, like I've said, is the symbol of Ra. Domesticated cats have no direct lineage to the big cats. No proof whatsoever. Big cats mainly have round pupils. Domesticated cats have snake or reptile eyes, which suggests it was created with Draco-reptilian genetics. Hi all and welcome back. Now we're over the cult of the cat. We're going to move on to what if the Exodus didn't just go west to Egypt but north as well. Now, following on from Russia with Love series 1 and 2 and the Kali Ma people who were thrown out of the Garden of Eden in India, the Kali Ma is the Dark Mother worship and also human sacrificing. So something got me thinking on that, and it led into this piece, which I have covered before, but I have extended. And it certainly, at this point, appears to fit in with what went on in that particular region at a later date. So what if, along the way of the Exodus, some of those discarded did go north out of India, as the others exiled went west towards Egypt? Now, the ones who went north over a period of time raised a vast army, because if you go directly north out of India, you'll reach the land now known as Mongolia, which of course is famous for the wars further north and west of that region, and the entity known as Genghis Khan, who went on various conquests against all and sundry, we are led to believe, but I now suspect it to be against one group of peoples only, the Rus and the Slavonic Aryans. The name Khan is the Asian spelling of Cohen, Cohen being one of the Ashkenazi Jewish line and related to Noah. He, who, let's not forget, was given the heads up about the flood from the so-called gods, of which I believe Noah was from that group. So we had the Khazarian Jews who fled west, and the Ashkenazi Jews who went north, and their leader in the 1200s was Genghis Khan, who it is suspected was not fully human either, given some of his exploits and or antics. Now, Genghis Khan attacked the north and the so-called barbarians, but the reality is those barbarians were far more advanced than anything on this planet before or since. And the reality is, due to several attacks over time, starting 110,000 years ago, there was the war 7,500 years ago, of which a great wall was built by the Rus, not the Chinese. now known as the Great Wall of China. So is there evidence that backs this up, that the Rus built the Great Wall? Yes, the defence posts are facing the wrong way for it to have been built by the Chinese. That evidence can be found all along the wall. Also look at the construction of it and match it with other construction right round the world. It is Rus, or the more modern day Tartarian, most of which has been attributed to the Greeks or Romans, but most of them were built long before their construction period. So Khan and his army also went west to follow the Khazarian route also, and landed in Iran, known as the land of the Aryans. Why would a group from Mongolia go so far west to attack that one country? Look at the distance on the map. It's near 3,000 miles. It would be a massive undertaking now, never mind back then. So Khan, or Cohen, arrived in Nishapur in Iran, which is close to R2, and Nishapur, which is on Lake Irma, all close to the Caucasian mountains, which means white. R2 and Lake Urmia is the clue, like the Al Mountains and the original Jerusalem, which was Jerusalem in Russia. This was another region. Now, means the original or the earliest. So Khan arrived in Nishapur and in one day slaughtered 1,768,000 people in the land of the Aryans. 1.75 million people in one day. And that place is not too far away from the original Kingdom of Manna, I might add, which was also in Iran. But do you think it's possible for a load of people on horseback with spears, bows and arrows and swords to kill that many in one day as recorded? No. Khan had advanced weaponry and was given help by the dark off or in-world forces, is the more common sense thinking answer. Now, to many, that will be seen as not possible, but that is because they only think advanced weaponry is a last century invention. It's not. When archaeological evidence right across the Middle East shows extensive radioactive fallout layers from thousands of years ago, proving a nuclear war back then. And the little known fact that Russia was attacked by nuclear weapons in 1812 could well tell a different story. Now, the ones who were exiled out of the Garden of Eden, modern day India, to Egypt, it appears, as we stated earlier, at the same time as the rise of the cult of the Amun-Ra. Again, they are Hebrew deities. Amun means the hidden, and this entity who wasn't even here in form at any stage is worshipped by most religions when you end the prayer with Amen. Again, the Amun-Ra followers did rituals and sacrifices as they did back in India, and it spread throughout the world. Amun-Ra came from the Mount Zion region, which is where the modern day term Zionist came from. Hence the book which the system tries to deny exists, but in reality it does, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a book about Jewish world domination, It's all there if you look and connect the dots. Now, Jewish is the latest label used and designed to create divide and conquer. Replace Jew with dark forces of the dark where necessary. Not all of them. These people in general have nothing to do with Jews, Israel, the country, the Bible, or anything else. They are tricksters of the dark arts and have used every trick in the Grimoire book against humanity. The modern day owner of King Solomon's ring, the Rothschilds, what is on the ring? A six-pointed star. Which country is represented by the six-pointed star? Israel. Except the Star of David, as it is called, came not from Israel, but Egypt. King David was not from Israel either, but was also from Egypt. Early scholars and researchers reciting ancient books all state King Solomon was of Egypt, not Israel. The fact that a search for ancient Egyptian seal of Solomon brings up 6 discounting articles straight off the bat before observing the evidence suggests a cover-up for me. Now on the ring, Solomon's ring on each side, is the pharaoh headdress known as nemes, and is the ritual Egyptian headdress of the pharaohs, ritual being the operative word. Quote, in retrospect, the six-pointed star was an Egyptian occult symbol which King Solomon adopted when he went into idolatry and witchcraft and built an altar for Ashtaroth. It was his love for Ashtaroth that led to his particular descent into the dark magic realms, which we covered in Demons and Magic. Now there's a book, Ireland, the land of the pharaohs. It spoke of the exodus of the teachers out of Ireland to Egypt. Why? To teach. Why Egypt? Because they were the Kalimar peoples. Why Irish? Because they have blue eyes, and some of them were of Aryan stock. Next section, Solomon, Ra, Hebrew and sacrifice. Inside Solomon's temple, the Holy of Holies for the Jewish people, except it was the house of Israel and this was Egyptian. There are 2 altars, or there was 2 altars. One was for animals and one for humans in the Holy of Holies. Now in the book of Exodus it says, in the 4 corners there were placed a horn, symbolizing the bull and Moloch. When sacrifices were done with and to Moloch, the children were passed to him and thrown in a fire pit. In the temple, one pit was called the brazen altar, which was a fire pit. And this is where they sacrificed children and adults, as referenced by this piece. Quote, you may remember that King David's son, Adonijah, went into the temple and took hold of the horns of the altar in an attempt to escape the wrath of Solomon, the new king of Israel. It should be noted that it also worked for him. Solomon spared him as he hung onto the horns of the altar and asked for mercy. Unquote. The word that is ordinarily translated as altar in the Old Testament comes from a root word that means to sacrifice or to slaughter. So in a literal sense, the altar was a place of sacrifice or slaughter. Now, we had other names given it to it in the Old Testament. It was sometimes called the brazen altar. This emphasis upon the brass that covered the altar associated it with judgment. It is also often called the altar of burnt offerings. It should be noted that Solomon was the king of the house of Israel, not the country. And this is where many researchers have been led astray. All these are representations of Egypt, not Israel. Even the pharmaceutical symbol RX is a representation of Egypt and the Eye of Horus. The winged sun disk is the wings of Horus and the omnipotence of the solar god Ra. Hence the plethora of solar representations in many of the adverts and corporate logos. All of them are worshipping Ra. The Twin Towers, Joachim and Boaz, were initially in Luxor, Egypt, as obelisks, another symbol fest, as they are now anchored all around the planet. Same worship. The five-pointed star hails the Pentagon and the main centre of Freemasonry in DC is the Order of the Eastern Star, another reference to Egypt or Sumer. In France, you have the Louvre, a pyramid. The Statue of Liberty, which was built in France by Freemasons, is exactly the same height as the Pyramid of Giza. These are all the hidden representations of the fake gods out of Egypt and also Sumer. The Star of David is the symbol of Israel, we're told. But in Hebrew, it actually is called the Magen David, or the Shield of David. And it is unlikely that the King David's shield actually looked like the current modern day emblem, as it is actually a relatively modern in its association with the Jewish people. Although the Magen David was mentioned as early as the 12th century, it was not generally recognised as a symbol of the Jewish community until the 17th century. The reason being, the term Jewish didn't start until 1540, when the letter J was finally introduced. Iudeisc. It was before then. And if that was the case, why wasn't those terms used in the Bible and other ancient scriptures? The initial terminology attributed to being Jewish was 1600, and it was used in reference to extortionate money lending. That was the first reference to Jewish people. Extortionate money lending. Seems like the Rothschilds were not popular back then. You know. Today we see the blue Magen David on each flag that flies proudly in the nation of Israel. But in Israel, it's often to see the symbol in a different colour. It's red. Magen David Adam, red shield of David, Roth shield, Roth child. And it's Israel's national emergency medical disaster ambulance, and no surprise, blood bank service. Another example is described in the Out of Zion section, which features an article on IBM's, IB Marduk, remember, software that masks sensitive subscriber data, noting that its Israeli developers named it Megan. Remember, IBM stands for IB Marduk, aka Ra. Now, the actual Israeli flag symbolizes the lands promised to Abraham. And no, it's not just Jerusalem either. The two blue lines on the flag symbolize the two rivers, the Nile and the Euphrates, and all lands in between. Now, the Nile region goes down to what is known as the Great Bend, which is 33 degrees. Getting a picture now? And it then goes across to the bottom of the Euphrates, which borders Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait. Now, the lands in between encompass Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, the western side of Iraq, and southern Turkey. Caliphate, anyone? All regions where there has been or is recent wars, except Egypt, due to them being the descendants of the Jewish peoples, and Saudi Arabia, who are the main funders of the country now known as Israel. Who runs Saudi Arabia? The House of Saud. The house, the Pharaoh of Saud. You getting the picture now? Now, I don't wish, and I genuinely mean this, to denigrate any Jewish person. But let's look at things rationally here. Why are there so many gaps in the knowledge? Let's take the Bible and its use of the letter J and the names. How can it have so many with the letter J when it was not used as a letter before the 1600s? Job, John, Jehovah, Joseph, James, to name but a few. But the most famous name on the planet is probably Jesus. Why have they changed his name? Now, as a reference, who are the ones who switch names the most? We've covered it many times in the shows. The Jewish and the Germanic peoples. Not Germany, Germanic. Bauer becomes Bayer. Elizabeth Saxe-Coburg Gotha becomes Windsor to hide her roots. The list is endless once you look. But what is their obsession with changing their names? Well, the obvious answer is to cover something up. They don't want the general public to see or notice. Like Solomon and his references to Israel, when all fingers point to Egypt. Just like the Nile or denial, things become quickly muddy, do they not? But again, in reference to the Bible, we have names like Michael, James, David, Samuel, John, Adam, Joseph, Mark, Matthew, Paul, Peter, Thomas, Stephen. And nobody asks why all these names, who are all so important, are all British names and spelt the British way. These were all supposed to be Middle East peoples, were they not? I said earlier, Freemasonry is linked into it. Take the double-headed eagle symbol of the Scottish Rite. It's called the Eagle of Lagash. Lagash is an ancient Sumerian city and was the symbol for Ninurta, son of Enlil, who is god of that city. The Sumerians referred to themselves as the Ug-Sag-Giga, which means the black-headed people, which is the same black-headed people in India that were worshipping the Kali Ma. You connecting the dots now? In the Bible, we are told about the exodus of the Israelite peoples for 40 years, of what I think is the Amun-Ra cult, who were thrown out of Egypt, and they were to return, we're told, to the Holy Land, as it is portrayed. And yet, when you overlay the trail of the Exodus on all map searches, none of them lead to Jerusalem, Judea, original Palestine, or modern-day Israel. Where did that Exodus go to? It stopped at a place northeast of modern-day Israel, and the name of that place? Ammon, as in Amun-Ra, as in Ammon, the Solomon demon spirit. As we said earlier, Ammon is represented as a wolf with a serpent tail, chimera. Ra is represented by the lion, and this is why so many of the houses of Europe have lions on their seals. England itself has on its emblem 3 lions, which goes back to Richard the Lionheart and King John time period again. The 3 lions represent the 3 houses. England is represented by the Angevin house, the House of Normandy, and the House of Aquitaine. So all 3 lions are representations of houses in France. All single out now. 3 lions on my shirt. Or should it be allez, 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 allez? England's represented by 3 houses of France. Still to this day. Now, interestingly, in the series A Discovery of Witches, a witch was bound in a box by a vampire, and it kept repeating a warning: beware of the blood of the lion and the wolf. This is a reference to the Amun-Ra cult. Now, Ammon, the site of the modern-day city of Amman, is Jordan's capital. Now, Milcom and Molech, who may be one and the same, are named in the Hebrew Bible as the gods of Ammon. so provides another link of who these people really represent. Molech is Moloch. Moloch is the biblical name of a Canaanite god associated with child sacrifice. Another dot connected. But the question is, why would a Hebrew Jewish book that is related to Israel reference an Egyptian god and the peoples out of Egypt? If it was not the case that they are in a roundabout way telling you who they really are and who they represent. It's all in the words again. The Jewish book, as it's called, is called the Torah. Or is it really called Torah? Clitarchus, Diodorus Siculus and Plutarch all mention burning of the children as an offering to Cronus or Satan, that is to Baal Hammon, the chief god of Carthage, and Yahweh. Plutarch wrote, but with full knowledge and understanding, they themselves offered up their own children, and those who had no children would buy little ones from the poor people, and cut their throats as if they were lambs or young birds. Meanwhile, the mother stood by without a tear or a moan. But should she utter a single moan or let fall a single tear, she had to forfeit the money, and her child was sacrificed nonetheless. And the whole area before the statue was filled with a loud noise of flute and drums, so that the cries of the wailing should not reach the ears of the people. Have you ever heard such heinous behaviours in all your life? Sacrificing your children in the name of fake gods, houses, kings and corrupted bloodlines. These people are beyond sick, and subsequently a blight on this whole planet. These people are bereft of any basic human emotions. They think they're above and beyond all and sundry. Sins to them are a pastime. Rituals are something to be enjoyed, and great suffering revelled in, and death is an honour of them and their gods. Moloch is referred to as the king in the Hebrew Bible, and some are suggesting Moloch and Yahweh are the same entity. Now, according to Eisfeld, there was a 7th century reform that abolished the child sacrifice that had hitherto been an acceptable part of the cult of Yahweh, implemented by Uzziah in 640 BC. Now, Moloch, as said earlier, is the biblical name of a Canaanite god associated with child sacrifice. Now, the name of this deity is also sometimes spelt differently. There's that repeating thing again. Molech, Milcom, or Malcham. And rabbinical tradition depicted Moloch as a bronze statue heated with fire into which the victims were thrown. Moloch is represented as the owl in Bohemian Grove, where they still sacrifice children to this day. Same peoples, same cult. Now, Moloch is often represented as a bull, as in papal bull, which signifies out of Egypt into Rome, or Bible. So where does the owl reference come in? Well, the name for the owl is Moloch or Moloch. In which country? Egypt. And the Amun-Ra cult again. That's where the owl comes from. One of the depictions of the Sanhedrin Council, which was where they allegedly killed and tried Jesus. The floor is black and white checkered, just like the rogue Freemasonic floor. Joachim and Boaz are Kabbalah symbols. Now, Freemasonry has been one of the biggest drivers of these Kalimar people's ideologies and narrative, all done with their secret codes, handshakes and signs, which is all too reminiscent of the Kalimar, Egypt, Israel and Hebrew cover-up, is it not? These Egyptians, who later became known as Israelites, were the Kalimar people from India, who then went on their world domination scheme. This is a global problem, and it's got nothing to do with Israel, the country, or the majority of its people. We've all been duped. But look at this passage for a clue as to who these people are. Acts 7:37 through 43. This is that Moses, to whom our fathers would not obey, but thrust him from them, and in their hearts turned back again into Egypt. And they made a calf in those days. Calf is bull, as in Bible, as in the Baphomet, which is also represented by the six-pointed star, and offered sacrifices unto the idol, and rejoiced in the works of their own hands. Then God turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets. O ye house of Israel, have you offered to me slain beasts and sacrifices by the space of 40 years in the wilderness? Yea, ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch, and the star of your god Remphan, who is another Egyptian deity, I might add, figures which ye made to worship them, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon. All there. What so-called advanced being, to be labelled a god, encourages such demonic behaviours? How is that moral, righteous, or non-sinning? It's one giant circus ring. Roll up now and watch the hall of mirrors masking the illusion, the gods in the gallery taking the piss out of the clowns. Only humanity are the clowns. And if we don't perform the maximum in heinous behaviours, we will be sacrificed. And yet they've managed to dupe 4.5 billion into this satanic practice. Whether it's Hebrew, Christian, Muslim or any other religion, they are all based on the same promise: follow our orders and practices, or we will send in the demon court jester type spirits to ruin your life. The key part in that Act 7:37 through 43 is it says the house of Israel. It didn't say the house of Egypt, did it? Like I said, it was a house, like the House of Orange, the House of Bavaria, the Habsburgs, Saxe, Coburg, Gotha. These are all the royal bloodline group. And the house of Israel is the house of Isis and Ra, as in the Amun-Ra out of Egypt. The worship of these Satanists goes on today, with the worship of Moloch in the Bohemian Grove, the House of Rothschilds with their Ring of Solomon, which moved into a new base in Switzerland, which means twin sisters, as in ISIS. Jesus, they say, is the King of the Jews. But what is inscribed on his cross? IHS. Isis, Horus and Set, as in Setan, as in Saturn. The six-pointed star is a representation of Yahweh, which also represents Saturn. Who do the Jews worship now? Yahweh. Can you all see the picture now? Yah means yes, and way means sore or painful. And yes, it's been sore and painful for many of us outside of that program. None more so than the Israeli people. There is also a global worship of the Black Virgins, also called Black Madonnas. And its origin, they say, is unknown to the researchers who wrote this piece. Whoever the enigmatic Black Virgin may be, she holds a powerful attraction for millions of devotees around the world. Her sacred sites stand on highly charged earth energy centres, enhanced by the megalithic ley lines and the sacred architecture. The Black Virgin is the Kali Ma, the Dark Mother, who took over all the earth energy centres, the ley lines, and they built churches. The Grimoire, which is known as the Book of Spells. It's a textbook of magic, typically including instructions on how to create magical objects like talismans and amulets, and how to perform magical spells, charms and divination, and also how to summon or invoke supernatural entities such as angels, spirits, deities and demons. Now, the word grimoire originated from the old French word grammaire, which had initially been used to refer to all books written in Latin. So grammar schools and grammar education is all about spell casting the children. The ancient Egyptians also employed magical incantations, which have been found inscribed on amulets and also other items. The Egyptian magical system, known as Heka, H-E-K-A, was greatly altered and enhanced after the Macedonians, led by Alexander the Great, who invaded Egypt in 332 BC. He didn't invade at all. The ancient Greeks and Romans believed that the books on magic were invented by the Persians, another place known for cats. The ancient Jewish peoples were often viewed as being knowledgeable in magic, which according to legend they had learned from Moses, who had learnt it in Egypt. Many ancient writers believe Moses was seen as an Egyptian rather than an Israeli. I would go further. I would say he was Anunnaki. The Bible tells us that everyone on earth was drowned except for Noah and his family, and that all mankind are descended from his three sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth. In later times, the idea was widely adopted by the Christians, and to a lesser extent by Muslims and Jews, that the three sons of Noah represented the ancestors of the three major racial or linguistic groups. Now, according to this interpretation, Ham was the ancestor of the dark-skinned peoples of Africa, Shem of the Hebrews and their various cognates, and Japheth the ancestor of the Medes, Persians, Greeks and other peoples who many centuries later became known as the Aryans. Now, the Jewish Sanhedrin narrative states this: for decades after the genetic code of the priestly DNA was broken, and we now know that certain unknown men were father to father descendants of the Khan, or the priestly lineage of the Jews who served in the 1st century temple of King Herod in Jerusalem, and a new dimension came into understanding. Since that day, Jewish Temple Mount leadership have been preparing for the return of the King Messiah, Melech HaMashiach. Is Melech Molech or Moloch? It's that foul or subtle name change again. And the restoration of the temple sacrificial services as directed by Hashem, reference to Shem, the son of Noah, the God of Israel, to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, at the mount called Sinai. This is the same King Herod who ordered the massacre of the innocents, who declared to sacrifice all male children under the age of 2 around Bethlehem. So it wasn't just Solomon, the first temple, who did sacrifices to the children in the temple. It was done in the second temple as well. The Holy of Holies, they call it. Well, holy must have a completely different meaning to me. Come along, one and all worship the gods while we slaughter and sacrifice your children. I mean, what in the name of Satan's portion is that all about? And yet, these people want to build a third temple. To do what? Sacrifice more of our people? Sacrifice more of our children? Whilst the chosen ones sit back and laugh at our own stupidity? Don't think so. It really is unbelievable. You know, this has gone on for thousands of years. This sacrificial of our children and our people. And they've duped many of us. Like I said, none more so than the Jewish people themselves. It has to stop. And we have to face up to the faceless men. Hi all, and welcome back. The next part is called Trump, Sanhedrin and the Talmud. San means settlers. Hedron means face. In other words, the faces of the settlers. What are the Israeli peoples called in the occupied territories? The settlers. Now, Mr. Trump, whether directly or indirectly, recently received a coin from the Sanhedrin, which is supposed to represent Israel and the Jews, except on the back of the coin it references Trump as Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was the king of Persia, and nothing to do with Israel or the Jewish people. And then I found this piece. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, who is Anu, and the grandfather of Marduk. The God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. Kingdoms became houses. And he has appointed me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judea. Whoever there is among you of all his people, may his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judea, and rebuild the house of the Lord, house of Anu, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Cyrus the Great proclaimed himself the king of Babylon, king of Sumer and Akkad, king of the four corners of the world, in the famous Cyrus cylinder, an inscription deposited in the foundations of the Esagila temple, dedicated to the chief Babylonian god called Marduk. The text of the cylinder denounces Nabonidus as impious and portrays the victorious Cyrus pleasing the god Marduk, who at one point in time, as I've said, played the role of Ra. Now Cyrus is represented as a four-winged human, just like the Anunnaki Sumerians. And there's a reference to a quote of Isaiah, "Who are these that fly like a cloud and like doves to their windows?" This is the Anunnaki, the Draco. So what do we make of that piece? Did the Lord, Anu, ask him to build a 3-bed, 2-bath detached home in Jerusalem? Not quite. You see, house is a control system. Pharaoh means great house. All to house the psychopaths, the cult, and the occultists who follow him. Does anyone not question why the Lord, or God, only wants real estate built in one city? Perhaps he works for Halliburton or Bastet. Yeah. Funny enough, in a search of Halliburton, it brought up this reference, James Halliburton, 1788-1862. That's where the term come from. Later changed his name to James Burton. Guess what his profession was? A British Egyptologist. You can't make this stuff up. Then when the name changes again. Now some people will have difficulty understanding the depths these peoples will go to. So I'll start this next part with just some of the excerpts taken from the Talmud Hebrew book that these psychopaths follow to the letter, as it will give you an understanding of how these people operate. It lays it all out for you if you're open-minded enough and not blinded by the narrative that's been laid out for us. The Torah is the book of the Jews. It's a Christianized version, as no one, not Jewish, was allowed to read the Talmud, as you'll see from the quotes. Now the quotes lay the foundation for the rest of this show. I will reference the term Jew or Jewish often in this piece, but bear in mind this has nothing to do with being a modern day Jewish person. This is a dark forces program. We've all been used, none more so than the Jewish people themselves. Those not participating in this dark occult practices of rituals and sacrifices need to be embraced. The fake God they follow is against the whole of humanity. These are not Jews, Jewish or Israel, but back to Egypt and Ra, the Amun-Ra cult, Sumer, and further back to the Kalimar people in India. The first one is from the Talmud Sanhedrin. To communicate anything to a Goy, which is non-Jew, about our religious relations would be equal to the killing of all Jews. For if the Goyim knew what we teach about them, they would kill us openly. Book of David. A Jew should and must make a false oath when the Goyim asks if our books contain anything against him. Next book, Noah. When the Messiah comes, every Jew will have 2,800 slaves. Next quote out of the Shabbat. On the house of the Goy, Goy means unclean and is the disparaging term for a non-Jew, one looks as on the fold of cattle. Next quote from the Hamizspat. If it can be proven that someone has given the money of Israelites to the Goyim, a way must be found after prudent consideration to wipe him off the face of the earth. Zohar. That the Jewish nation is the only nation selected by God, while all the remaining ones are contemptible and hateful. That all property of other nations belongs to the Jewish nation, which consequently is entitled to seize upon it without any scruples. An Orthodox Jew is not bound to observe principles of morality towards peoples of other tribes. He may act contrary to morality if profitable to himself or to Jews in general. A Jew may rob a Goy, he may cheat him over a bill, which should not be perceived by him, otherwise the name of God will become dishonoured. In other words, if a non-Jew kills a Jew, the non-Jew can be killed. Punching an Israelite is akin to assaulting God, but killing a non-Jew is not like assaulting God. If a Goy killed a Goy or a Jew, he is responsible, but if a Jew killed a Goy, he's not responsible. Everyone who sheds the blood of the impious, which it means non-Jews, is as acceptable to God as he who offers a sacrifice to God. Yalkut. Extermination of the Christians is a necessary sacrifice. Next one. Even the best of the Goyim should be killed. Jehovah, who is Yahweh, created the non-Jew in human form so that the Jew would not have to be served by beasts. The non-Jew is consequently an animal in human form and condemned to serve the Jew day and night. Nice piece, that. Everything a Jew needs for his church ritual, no Goy is permitted to manufacture, but only a Jew, because this must be manufactured by human beings, and the Jew is not permitted to consider the Goyim as human beings. A Jew may do unto a non-Jewess what he can do, he may treat her as he treats a piece of meat. A Jew may violate but not marry a non-Jewish girl. And the last one, if that wasn't enough, a boy goyim after 9 years and 1 day old, and a girl goyim after 3 years and 1 day old are considered filthy. After those ages are passed, it is okay to sexually use and abuse those children, what is known within the circle as pederasty. In other words, glorified pedophilia. That's in God's book. And that's just a portion of it. Now, should we all denigrate Jewish people for reading and believing in this type of, what is quite frankly, disgusting narrative? Not really. The Jewish people have been duped on a massive scale, used as pawns and also the world's pariah. Created all the world's religions via the Talmud. The Torah is the watered down version. And this was all passed on to them by the former control system via Egypt. And in essence, they are victims, but not necessarily fully guilt-free either. It has been passed down from generation to generation and has turned many people against the so-called Jews. Anti-Semitism is often used against people who are critical of their practices, except one important fact is often left out: the Jews are not Semites. Most originate from southern Russia, border countries, and also India. And those people have been used as a political, religious football for many, many centuries now. It's important to remember the truth never fears so much of a cover-up about the Holocaust, the Jewish involvement, and a banning of criticising anything connected to Israel, because it's denigrating their fake God is why, and covering up an insidious program of harvesting, sacrifice and death. Next portion, what happened around 2,000 years ago and the transfer of power from the Middle East to Europe. Now, following the connections of Egypt and the Ra cat cult to first Greece and then Rome, all of which were connected due to previous infiltrations and moves, we will see how Judaism did rise at the time, not by faith, but by the sword and war. Peoples of the region were forced into taking on the Egyptian Judaic religion all across the region, which laid the foundations to take over Europe and eventually the Americas, the final frontier. All roads lead to Rome, they say. Not from Rome, to Rome. Rome wasn't built in a day, is another saying. No, it was built over hundreds, if not thousands of years, and it was not built by Romans either. Julius Caesar appointed an antipater, which is a Macedonian Greek term, to be a procurator of Judea in 47 BCE, and he appointed his sons Faisal and Herod, he of the child sacrifice, to be governors of Jerusalem and Galilee respectively. Now the Antipater was murdered in 43 BCE, However, his sons managed to hold the reins of power and were elevated to the rank of tetrarchs in 41 BCE by Mark Antony. Bearing in mind now the Greek Cleopatra was the queen of Egypt and was sleeping with both of these men. A common theme amongst the elites to spread their power, wealth and families. All about control, you see. And we're just pawns in the game. But then in came a relative unknown in biblical circles, which will go into the next piece after the music break, and yet achieved so much carnage and death. This guy was John Hyrcanus, and he was a Hasmonean Maccabean leader and Jewish high priest for the 2nd century BCE. Born in 164 BCE, reigned from 134 BCE until his death in 104 BCE. In rabbinic literature, he is often referred to as the Yohanan Cohen Gadol. That name again. John the High Priest. Now, his name meaning is Hyrcania, being in Greek form of the Persian name Vakana, which meant wolf land, and referred to a historical region in Persia. Remember, Amun was represented by the wolf. It's all connected. And the reason the connections to the Greeks are linked to Alexander the Great and also Cleopatra, both were Greeks, and Hellenism was being accepted by the Jewish peoples of that region. But after Alexander died, in stepped Hyrcanus to expand the so-called Israelite Empire. It wasn't Israel, which I will repeat again, has got nothing to do with Jews or the modern day Israel. Israelites were out of Egyptian origin and formerly the exiled people out of India. Before we go into the next piece, we're going to have another music break, and this is called When Two Tribes Go to War. When two tribes go to war. Well, lots of tribes went to war, and it's important to cover how it transitioned of Egyptology, Amun-Ra, which morphed into Israelites and went into Rome. And here is a list of the tribes who around 2,000 years ago were converted to Judaism. The Idumeans, Edom, 2nd century, were conquered and converted by John Hyrcanus, and the Edomites were gradually integrated into the Judean nation. Not Israel. It's called the Judean nation. And some of them reached high-ranking positions. And now in the days of Alexander Genghis, Edomite Antipas, who was appointed governor of Edom, and his son Antipater, the father of Herod the Great, child sacrificer, was the chief advisor to the Hasmonean Hyrcanus II, and managed to establish a good relationship with the Roman Republic, who at that time, 63 BCE, extended their influence over the region following the conquest of Syria and intervention in a civil war in Judea. Mr. John Hyrcanus also attacked Samaria. Most people will not be familiar with that term, but it was the area now known as Palestine. and converted them to Judaism. And it's where the term Good Samaritan comes from. And here is a rather interesting snippet from a news item back in 1995, which suggests there was a cover-up. Before dawn on March the 21st, 1995, someone broke into a synagogue in the Palestinian city of Nablus. The thief, maybe it was a band of thieves, crossed the carpeted sanctuary, pulled back a heavy velvet curtain and opened a carved wooden ark. Inside there were 2 handwritten copies of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. One was a sheepskin scroll written around 1360 and kept in a slender copper case. The other was a codex, a thick book that was dated from the 15th century and bound in a maroon leather cover. Now the thief or thieves snatched the manuscripts, escaped through the synagogue's archway door, and discarded the copper case in the stairwell and then vanished. But these were no ordinary texts. They were perhaps the most ancient Torahs stolen in the Holy Land since the Crusaders pillaged Jerusalem. Crusaders were the Egyptian people that went to Rome. And they belonged not to the Jews, but to the Samaritans, now known as the Palestinians, one of the world's oldest and tiniest religious sects. Known from the New Testament parable of the Good Samaritan, the original group, not the fake charity, has barely survived. Centuries ago it was numbered more than 1 million. Today, according to the last count, there are only 810 Samaritans left. In those books, as I found out today, contains a lost city in Iraq called Isregard. That's why they were stolen. Etruscans, Lebanon and Syria, 2nd century again, conquered and converted by John Hyrcanus. Adiabin, northern Iraq and Persia, 1st century. Nabateans, many were forcefully converted by the Hasmonean king Alexander Jannaeus, who was the son of John Hyrcanus. The Khazars, a semi-nomadic Turkic people from Central Asia, historical Khazaria before it went Istan, many of whom converted to Judaism en masse in the 8th and 9th centuries from a Khazar religion, and so born the Khazarians. Himyarite Kingdom, Yemen. Why is there a war in Yemen? Go and check the population of the so-called Israelites in Yemen. You'll see why. 6th century, another region under war. Kingdom of Semite, Ethiopia. 4th century, site of the 4th and final Garden of Eden. Yes, that's where the last Garden of Eden went. Go and check the Israelite population of Ethiopia. Again, a country that has been riddled with war, and in particular famine. And yes, none of the Israelite people died, did they? Funny that, isn't it? During the first year of John Hyrcanus' reign, he faced a serious challenge to independent Judean rule from the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus VII marched into Judea, pillaged the countryside and laid a year-long siege on Jerusalem. The prolonged siege caused Hyrcanus to remove any Judean from the city who could not assist with the defence effort. His own people. If you couldn't fight, he threw them out. These refugees were not allowed to pass through the Antiochus lines, becoming trapped in the middle of a chaotic siege. So with a humanitarian crisis on his hands, Hyrcanus readmitted his estranged Jerusalemites when the festival of Sukkot arrived. Now afterwards, due to food shortages in Jerusalem, Hyrcanus negotiated a truce with the Antiochus, and the terms of the truce consisted of 3,000 talents of silver, Judas, payment for Antiochus, the breaking down of the walls of Jerusalem, Judean participation in the Seleucid war against the Parthians, and once again the Judean recognition of the Seleucid control. Now these terms were a harsh blow to Hyrcanus, who had to loot the tomb of King David to pay the 3,000 talents. You see, this is what I've been saying. These ruling elites don't give a monkey shite about the people, Jewish or otherwise. Those who could not assist with the war effort, in other words, the elderly, the disabled and the children, were all discarded. All sounds like what happened with the same peoples running the SS did in Germany, is it not? That will be in part 4. And people to this day still blame the Germans. Nope. A convenient stooge for these Ra worshippers and the sacrifice people. A reminder of the quote by Israel Cohen. Quote, "We will invest to instill in the whites a guilt complex over their exploitation of the Negroes." Unquote. Replace the word Negroes with Jews and you begin to see the pattern. The pattern always repeats unless it's interrupted. Hitler, no matter what people assume he did or didn't, we can largely only assume as we were not there, or a witness to direct policy. Assuming does not equal fact, despite their global programming of making everyone believe their narrative. But Hitler's original issues was not with the Jewish people, it was with the bankers. The same bankers that brought us usury. The same bankers Jesus warned against. The same Knights Templar bankers who collected everything and then looted everything under the banner of the Holy Crusaders. Essentially, Hitler was throwing out the Rothschilds. Oops. Can you imagine today if Trump threw out every Rothschild's bank this week? The man would be worshipped by many, would he not? The question remains is, why was or is Hitler any different? He was throwing the bankers out initially. What happens later was a distortion. And yes, we've all heard the collective stories, but those are not our facts. They are assumptions, and we are assuming that narrative is correct. John Hyrcanus driving out the non-military population of Jerusalem during the siege also probably caused resentment against him. The action of looting the tomb of David violated his obligations as the high priest, which would have offended the religious leadership at the time. However, in 128 BCE, Antiochus VII was killed in battle against Parthia. What followed was an era of conquest led by Hyrcanus that marked the high point of Judea as the most significant power in the Levant. John Hyrcanus was able to take advantage of unrest in Seleucia to assert Judean independence and conquer new territories. In 130 BCE, Demetrius II returned from exile in Hyrcania to take control of Seleucia. However, in transition of power, made it difficult for Demetrius to assert control over Judea. Furthermore, the Seleucid Empire itself fell apart into smaller principalities. The Itareans of Lebanon, the Ammonites of Transjordan, the Arabian Nabateans represented the independent principalities that broke away from Seleucid control. But Hyrcanus was determined to take advantage of the dissipating Seleucid Empire to increase the Judean Empire. And Hyrcanus also raised a new mercenary army that strongly contrasted with the Judean forces that were defeated by Antiochus VII. And the Judean population was probably still recovering from the attack of Antiochus and therefore could not provide enough able men for a Hyrcanus-led army. Now, John Hyrcanus' army was supported by the Judean state once again by funds that Hyrcanus removed from the tomb of David again. What? They stole from their great King David. Oh my. Proving pretty much nothing is actually sacred with these people. Now, beginning in 113 BCE, Hyrcanus began an extensive military campaign against Samaria, and he placed his sons Antigonus and Aristobulus in charge of the siege of Samaria. The Samaritans called for help and eventually received 6,000 troops from Antiochus IX. Although the siege lasted for a long, difficult year, Hyrcanus was unwilling to give up. Ultimately, Samaria was overrun and totally destroyed, all in the name of creating Judaism. That's what Jesus quotes earlier on. You go far just to create one convert, who are the children of hell. Now, Antiochus IX mercenary army was defeated, and the city of Scythopolis seems to have been occupied by Hyrcanus as well. And the inhabitants of Samaria were then put into slavery. Been going on a long time, slavery. You know, history tells you the whites started it when they took the Africans. Now, upon conquering the former Seleucidic regions, Hyrcanus embarked on a policy of forcing the non-Jewish populations to adapt Jewish customs. So the peoples of the Holy Land, the Samaritans, were pushed into slavery and forced to change religion. Nice way to treat God's chosen land's people, is it not? All very holy, sacred and treasured reason until the psychopaths decide they wish to subjugate it. But it didn't end there. John Hyrcanus' first conquest was an invasion of the Transjordan, and the mercenary army laid siege to the city of Medeba, and it took it after a 6-month siege. After these victories, Hyrcanus went north towards Shechem and Mount Gerizim. The city of Shechem was reduced to a village, and the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim was destroyed. This military action against the Shechem has been dated archaeologically around 111 to 110 BCE. Destroying the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim helped ameliorate John Hyrcanus' status amongst the religious elite and common Jews who detested any temple to Yahweh that was outside of Jerusalem. Hyrcanus also initiated a military campaign against the Edomites, and during this campaign Hyrcanus conquered Adora, Maresha and other Idumean towns. He then instituted forced conversions on the Idumeans to Judaism. Now this was an unprecedented move for a Judean ruler, and he was a Judean ruler in name only, is why. Now the reason he did that is Hyrcanus now no longer had to pay taxes or tributes to a weaker Seleucia. Against the same modern day Israelite followers don't pay the taxes, only the peoples. So you can now see how long this shit has been going on. The tax people. Moreover, Hyrcanus sought for good relations with the surrounding Gentile powers, as it was called, especially the growing Roman Republic. All nicely set up. The two decrees were passed in the Roman Senate that established a treaty of friendship with Judea. Also, an embassy sent by Hyrcanus received Roman confirmation of Hasmonean independence. Hyrcanus was an excellent case of a ruler that was backed by Roman support. Egyptian support, actually. In addition to Rome, Hyrcanus was also able to maintain steady relations with the Ptolemaic Egypt. That's what he was working for them, that's why. And this was probably made possible due to the various Jews living in Egypt who had connections with the Ptolemaic court. And the cities of Athens and Pergamon even showed honour to Hyrcanus in an effort to appease Rome. Down went Athens with it. So there you have it. The exodus and the spread of the cult, Amun-Ra, from the Middle East, coming out of Egypt into the European theatre, setting the stage for future programs of death and destruction, while these program runners all hide in the background. Setting the stage. Set being the operative word. For the rise of Rome, and all roads lead to Rome, no, all cults lead to Rome is the real saying. Rome was just a change of the theatre of operations. Yes, they built roads, because with roads you can attack other regions quicker, is why. Sabbath, bloody Sabbath. These are pedos and child sacrifices have gone throughout history. They all hide under different names, change letters, vowels here and there. But they're all part of the same cult. This is the final part tonight. There will be a part 4 and maybe a part 5 to this, as it brings it up to date. Well, from Rome became the secret societies take over. The houses, the families that spread across Europe and crushed all the rebels of the Kalimar peoples. And with it went many of the ancient cultures, teachings, better ways of doing things, and in came corporations controlling everything, land grabs, wealth stolen, children stolen via the birth certificate scam, chattel. Why would the so-called Holy Roman Church call us chattel, which means cattle? Well, when you look into what it states in the Talmud, we were created in human form so that the Israelites would not be served by beasts. And there's your answer. All the same ideology right through history that has us all duped. None more so than the followers of this fake religion known as Judaism or Hebrew. It's all the same shit and all the same program. The families, as they're known, the so-called royalty bloodlines, have been duped on a massive scale also. Distracted by titles which mean nothing, like monarchs. The reality is, we are all sovereign monarchs. Oops. System didn't tell you that, did they? Sorry to tell you and disrupt your little, we are bigger and better than you, the families and so-called royalty. You all bought the illusion that somehow you were the chosen ones, just like the Hebrews. You were given castles, land, jewels and lots of pieces of fiat paper to keep you all occupied and the illusion going, whilst they plotted our downfall and eventually your own downfall. Changing your names, forcing certain marriages on you, getting you to be involved in incest, just like the pharaohs in Egypt did back in the day. But it was corrupting you all, diminishing your bloodline, weakening your genetics and lowering your humanity. And for what? To be called the king or the queen, the bourgeoisie, which means walled city, bit like the Vatican and Solomon's Temple then, is it not? The elites, the upper class, etc., but it was all an illusion. Your real title was a harvester, with a real king, or so he thought, Marduk, Ra. So whilst you all quaffed and preened about, he and they sat back, laughing at you, the same way you look down your nose and laugh at us. Oh, the irony. You see, you're not so special after all. You were more stupid and ignorant than the so-called peasants were. You all thought the loot was going to you. Nope, it was going to him and the Dark Forces program, which you all ran for him like nice little puppets. Freemasons, the same thing. Thought you were more special with your fake degrees and your inner super-secret knowledge, but the real knowledge is and has been denied to you. You are part of a cult that plans to eliminate humanity. Whichever way you swing it, walk away from it, or you are part of the problem. All your symbolism is Egypt and Ra, and child sacrifice, Solomon, child sacrifice, Herod, Second Temple, child sacrificer. It's all about changing the names round, you see, like the man who invented the term racism, of which the main purpose of it was to use against Europeans to stifle any discourse by or against European peoples. Who did that? Leon Trotsky. Except his real name was Lev Bronstein. Oops. Who was a Marxist Jew involved in the Jewish takeover of Russia, and then declared Russia a communist country. But communism was created, as Israel Cohen stated, was a Jewish creation, an Israelite creation, a Ra creation. And this is how the Kali Ma and their sacrificial aligned followers reached the critical mass. They took over all of the earth grids of source charged energies and replaced it with the dark energies. Took over nations and its peoples. And this is how and why many of the tribal peoples ended up doing the same sacrifice rituals. It appears throughout history, starting from 110,000 years ago, and maybe even earlier, with the Rus texts, not the Vedic texts commonly associated with India. It's not. It came from the Rus and the Aryans who travelled south and east. The original teachings distorted into the Vedic religion and human sacrifice, which later morphed into the modern day religion of Hinduism, of Egypt, Israel, and around the world. Throughout history, the peoples of Rus have been targeted more than any other peoples or nation on the planet. And the question is why? Why did the off-world beings target them 110,000 years ago and destroy the whole continent of the Aryan? Why did the Ashkenazi Jews and Khan, Cohen, try to eliminate them in the 1200s? Why was Tartaria on every map in the 14th and 15th centuries get almost eliminated from history? Who dropped nuclear weapons on Russia in the 1800s? Why did the Khazarian Jews try to eliminate them in the 1900s with their fake Bolshevik revolution? Why is there a global propaganda against them, that all things Russian are bad, when adversely there's a global propaganda to not critique or question in any way the country now known as Israel? You see, there's the direct connection. When the Rus and the Aryan peoples brought us so much knowledge and enlightenment, far more than any other group on this planet ever, the dark forces won't allow that and create death, destruction and plunder programs to deny the human advancement. But they're not just stopping the white people's advancement. Oh no, all of you. And it's time you got your heads out of the Egyptian sand, or their river of denial. There's a joke in there somewhere. They are the masters of deception and played us all for fools, including their so-called own people. But reality is these dark artisans are not interested in people, only to use them, just as the quotes of the Talmud state, how they used the persecution tool to stifle discourse, an all too easy tactic. But this show has shown you a different story, and it's up to you to work through the illusion they presented to us and then fight back. Ignorance now, after this show, becomes a choice, and you become an accomplice to it by your own ignorance. Is northern Russia or parts of Russia different? Yep. Northern parts of Russia still to this day have a much higher vibrational frequency than anywhere else on the planet, it still lingers from the past. That's not supposition. That is actually fact, based on several reports of the people who have actually been there. Perhaps it was they, the Rus, who were the real teachers here. It was they who delivered the real person and teacher known as Jesus, but whose real name was Radomir. It was they who produced the blonde-haired, blue-eyed person known as Mary Magdalene. Both were hunted to death by the Roman Catholic Church, aligned with their demonic worship masters from Egypt and ancient India. And yet you still go to church. One day the real story will be revealed. But if we keep ignoring the real genocide on this planet, that it's not blacks or Jews or religious persecution, but the Aryan people and their descendants, then those real teachings and the teachers will be ultimately lost forever. I hope this show has, like the previous two, expanded your thinking. But if you wish to use these shows to shout racist or racism, you are part of the problem. If you use these shows to hate on all Jews or Israel, you are not only part of the problem, but you are beyond stupid. And I've clearly not seen the bigger picture. And you are only blinded by a tunnel vision finger pointing, the easy blame game culture, which is exactly what these cultists want. Final message to end this part 3 of this series is to the Jewish peoples. You have to get off your high horse and their Goyim and Gentile narratives. As the longer that goes on, the more they will use you as pawns. Message to the Jewish people: we have a common enemy that is being dragged into the light, that has been hidden for so long and duped so many with their sick, psychopathic sacrifice games. For those still thinking the Goyim, which is us, are shit under their shoe, who do you think will save you? It won't be Yahweh or Jehovah, that's a guarantee. For one, it is a fake God, and two, if he was ever saving you, you wouldn't have gone through so much strife for so long to begin with. The reality is it will be the so-called Goyim who will save you, and it's time you embrace them. It's time for us all to embrace each other, methinks. Final thing to ponder is, if you have to go to war to convert peoples to your religion, or hate others who don't share your religion, maybe your God is not who you thought it was. That applies to all religions. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name is Thomas Williams.